Welcome to Reddit Aliens. What's a scary urban legend from where you live? Not safe for work? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
So there's this story of a corrupt group of soldiers who during wartime threatened to kill people to get their way. The leader took a little boy and threatened to throw him off this small bridge because his older sister rejected him. It was rocky under the bridge, but the water was high, so the leader thought he'd just throw the kid and scare him a bit. He did so, but there was no splash, and instead all they heard was this sickening crunch. Kid died on impact and his head was split in half. His men panicked, and they tried to hide the kid's body, but as they went to retrieve it, it disappeared. Rumors had it that all the soldiers involved died of either drowning or falling from a great height. People would cross the bridge, and they'd get this impulse to look over, and sometimes they'd see what looked like the body of a kid floating in the water. Some even felt their hands being grabbed. There are even stories of cows being found drowned in the water. We have a few where I live. There's one about an old house that looked abandoned for well over 2 decades. The legend goes, an old woman lived there. She was once married, but they never had any kids. They tried, but they just couldn't. The husband went missing one day, and they never found him. People thought she probably killed him and hid it in the garden. Some say she ate him. Honestly, I'm not sure if any of it's true, but I do remember one night when I was in my teens, I walked past the abandoned home, and I swear still to this day that there was a light on and a figure at the window that looked like an old woman. A couple of years ago, they cleaned it up. It looks completely different now. No one will ever know what happened in that house now. Not even sure why it took them so long to clean it up. There must have been growth from at least 5 to 6 foot. But I still can't explain what I saw that night. This is one where I don't know what to believe.
I had a similar house in the neighborhood that I grew up in. Do any of you have any of that? Just a weird older house that kids would always tell some odd story about.
I live near one of the oldest cemeteries in the southeastern United States. They say if you hear whistling late at night, don't follow it or look back, or the dead will drag you to hell. One of my neighbors was a creepy guy. He was seen often walking and talking alone on the streets in the middle of the night, and, I cannot believe this was real, carrying a machete with him. This guy was basically crazy. He never felt pain. One time being hit by a car broke his leg, and he was worried about his cheese and his cowboy hat. Yelled random at things only he could see and being afraid of his mother in a weird way. He was 40 or something like that. He would do as his mother says, but he wasn't violent. Everyone said his mother made some kind of a deal with the devil because none of them worked but had money, and she sold his soul for this deal. He was in his own world, walking and mumbling random things, talking about death and angels. His mother died unexplained 2 years ago. She was found in the same day after he yelled on the street and someone called the ambulance. She passed on her bed with an expression of fear and her eyes showing pure shock. Her crying uncontrollable, asking who will stop the devil that's coming after him. After they buried his mother, he disappeared without a track. It is kinda hard to not see him because he was a 190 kilo, 80 kilo full muscles guy, but no one have seen him and I'm not sure what to believe. He always scared me but never did something to even approach me. A few times only saying hi because we lived on the same street. Recently, if I understood correctly, someone found his machete in the cemetery, but I don't know if it's true. And also his house is still empty because it's his property, and I'm not sure how the law works because he wasn't declared mentally ill, so he had all the rights on it. From time to time, you can still see a light in the attic, but no movement. I'm really curious what happened to him and where he is now. In the county where my grandma was raised in Maryland, there was a legend of Big Liz, a very large slave woman who was beheaded by her master after helping him to bury purloined treasure in the swamps of Dorchester County. Allegedly, if you stop on De Courcey Bridge in southwest Dorchester and honk, you can see the ghost of Big Liz searching for her head. On a related note, Harriet Tubman now has a national park in this county where she was born and raised. There was a story that in the 70s or 80s, some tunnel that used to be a storm drain collapsed and a bunch of homeless guys got trapped in the rubble, and the government never made any attempt to help them or get them out. Shortly after, there was a massive fire that damaged a huge chunk of town and completely destroyed the main government offices. So naturally, people blamed the fire on the ghosts of the people that were trapped in the rubble, trying to get revenge. In Norway, we have the legend of Og Nokken, who lives in ponds just waiting for people to wade in the water before pulling them underwater and drowning them. My mom told me when I was a child that you had to capture him by throwing a rock in the pond so it was safe to swim. If you threw the rock and it splashed, it wouldn't do anything, but if the rock landed and gave a plop sound, you had captured him. There's this set of apartments in my town, and the area is supposed to be haunted. Supposedly at night you can hear horses running and people screaming because there was supposed to be a Native American battle there long ago. A bunch of teens using a Ouija board, oh boy, leads to one of them asking what the spirit looks like. It says it has 3 legs. Later at night, when driving the next town over, an animal with 3 legs crossed the road. I wish I remembered more of this story. I don't live there anymore, but the house next to the one I grew up had some weird stories about it. It was abandoned and run down, but still had patio furniture in the back of the house, so it really looked abandoned in a hurry. Our old neighbor on the other side of our house said she knew the family that used to live there. She told us this story about how one night around 2 a.m. the family's daughter showed up at her door crying. The daughter was crying about how they had to leave that night and came to say goodbye. My neighbor said she saw them leave carrying garbage bags into their car, trying to take all they can. They left that night and never came back. Maybe a year after hearing this, me and my friend were playing catch in the backyard. He threw the ball over the fence of the creepy house, so I went to go get it. It was just a normal fence that divided the properties. You could go around it. I went around it and grabbed the football, and I look up at the second floor window and I swear I saw a woman looking out the window. I ran back to my house as fast as I effing could. Now, looking back on it, the woman was probably just a squatter or maybe just a teenager with her that broke in when her friends are looking for a place to smoke, but it still freaked me the F out. There's a story called the Hatchet Lady, where her son was brutally killed in front of her at some old sawmill. She went crazy and now comes to a summer camp looking in the cabins for her son. She takes him away only to hack him to pieces once the morning light reveals he's not her long-lost son. Some guy had a dungeon in the woods where he would take kids and chain them on the wall. It was more of a rumor spread by the kids when I grew up. It was based on the real man who lured 2 girls with chocolate, raped and killed them. Can't remember the details, might have chopped them up too. When I was a kid, we lived in a house called the Castle. Here's how the story went. Once there was a spinster that lived in our house, never married. She would kidnap children and hide them in a secret room in the basement under the porch. As they grew up, she would have to sew them new clothes. She did her sewing on the 3rd floor in the tower. It was a Queen Anne style house. Eventually, she died, and there was no one to feed the stolen children. They starved and only their bones remained. At night, you could see her ghost in her sewing room in the tower, still making clothes for the stolen children. In that I lived in the house, I can assure you that the legends were false, and we knew every owner of the house had. It only ever had 2 owners before us, wealthy mining families. It was built in the 1920s by a mine boss, and then later purchased by another mine boss. Still, it was a pretty cool children under the stairs legend. Some kids believed it. I believe it's based on real events, but the story goes that a lad who went to my high school was bullied a lot by his fellow classmates. They convinced him to meet up, where they subsequently threw him in a lake. He couldn't swim and drowned. They say his ghost still haunts the school long after those boys had left. I would roam around the school often, choosing to miss classes and go for a sneaky walk around instead because I just couldn't really handle a full day due to anxiety issues at the time. I never saw anything, but there was sometimes footsteps where no one was, and things creaking for no reason. It freaked me out a little bit. Not really an urban legend, but more like a myth. a girl swam too far from the shore and accidentally stumbled upon an underwater kingdom. The Sea Queen enabled her to breathe underwater and invited the girl to her castle. She wanted to make the girl her daughter, but the girl refused. The girl was able to escape from the castle after pretending she was drowning. The Sea Queen has since claimed a young girl's life each year. It's just a story to scare the children, but I can't really remember a year when no girl has drowned in that beach. 1. Bongbong Marcos is actually dead. This story originated in the 70s, but still made the rounds in the 80s to the early 90s. According to the rumors, Bongbong Marcos died a long time ago when he was supposedly involved in a car crash. Other versions tell the story that he was abducted by rebels in Mindanao. According to the legend, the Marcos family pretended that Bongbong was still alive and hired someone to undergo plastic surgery and act like Bongbong. Of course, the story intrigued the nation, especially the political rivals of the Marcoses. Okay, this is kind of weird considering this was in the 70s, and right now in the Philippine elections, my tita is voting for Bongbong Marcos. So about 20 minutes away from where I lived is a road called Bray Road. Supposedly, in the late 1980s and into the early 90s, there were numerous sightings of an abnormally large canine-like creature, which became known as the Beast of Bray Road. These reports spread to other areas in the state as well. It caused quite the hype around here when I was little. A woman died on a highway when she got in a car accident with her husband the night of her wedding day. Now, her ghost roams around hitchhiking at night, asking drivers to take her to her house, asks for their jackets and promises to return it the next day. The driver arrives at the house the next day to be greeted by an older woman who claims that she does not live there anymore and is dead. Directs the driver to her tombstone to find his jacket on it. Happened multiple times, and that highway is known as the Highway of Death, as so many people have crashed and lost their lives there. I come from Sicily. During the 1960s, the mafia started to illegally build residential buildings all over my city with the support of corrupt politicians and a frightened or colluding society. They destroyed historic villas in the old town and urbanized the beautiful landscape around the old town to make way for big, ugly buildings. Legends say that if you have a flat in one of the buildings built at the time, it is possible that inside the wall of your rooms, there are victims of the mafia hidden in the concrete. Not where I live now, but where I live when I go to Mexico. La Llorona can be heard. El Charro Negro has been seen by the father of my grandpa, little gnomes who come to steal children in the night who are in the woods and witches. People that live near there believe the same, even adults. Our elders often refer to the legend of the White Lady. Hence, in Alsace, we like to say that the myth originates from our Middle Age folklore, even though nothing really proves that the story began here. The myth got shared during the Middle Ages and traveled from Germany to Russia to Japan to Brazil and to the US. The legend was changed from a dying woman wearing a white robe to the known ghost figure present in so many fiction works. So the primary school I was enrolled in had an abandoned house about 20 meters away, a big orange and red house with a small singular room built at the top. Said room had a small round window in it, around 30 to 50 centimeters if I had to eyeball it. Plus, the house main door wasn't on the street. You had to enter the house main gate and cross a small rock bridge to get there. Needless to say, it looks weird to an adult, let alone a child. Adding to the creepiness was the fact that many adults refused to approach that house, and many of the older kids said it was haunted. You could hear beatings, howlings, and glass being scratched from the top room if you come close to it at night. The kids kept asking the teachers about it to no avail, and being kids, we of course added to the legend. It reached the point parents of the newly enrolled students started making detours to not pass in front of said house. One of my teachers, when he found out that it was happening, went, "Guess I need to tell the story every year to not scare your parents, you little gremlins." He warned us it was a bit gruesome, but we were kids, we didn't care. As he said, and other teachers and the janitor confirmed later, the house belonged to a rather wealthy family. Sadly, their eldest son showed signs of severe mental illness in his late 20s. most likely schizophrenia. He heard voices. He was quickly hospitalized, but his delusions made him incredibly violent, thrashing around, beating and punching the staff, breaking furniture, biting anything he could find. To add, he was quite big and a massive gym rat prior to the onset of his illness, so he was built like a brick house. He was still respectful of his dad despite his illness, however, which is how they could take him to an institution to begin with. But quickly, he was too much to bear. He severely maimed multiple nurses and doctors. He was way too violent to be flown to a country with better mental health facilities. None of the medicines he was taking were working, and he was incredibly resilient to sedatives. In the end, he was deemed too dangerous, but his family refused to trap him in a straitjacket for the rest of his days, especially as he apparently made a habit of gnawing the rubber mouthpiece off, built him the little room to live in, and decided to care for him, banking on the fact that he was still docile around his father. The neighborhood wasn't thrilled, but accepted it. The room was secured with multiple locks and a steel door, built with the best soundproofing tech the mid-70s could offer, and a cat door to slide food under just in case. They'd hear him scream from time to time, but it was muffled enough for them not to care. The mom passed away at the end of the 70s. There was only the insane man and his now elderly father in the house. Cue the mid-80s. OG teacher and janitor said December 1984. Others said later, with January 1987 as the latest. The neighbors started hearing screaming, sounds of beatings, yells of pain, roars, all coming from the little room and way, way louder than usual. Weirder still, the window was open. They waited for it to be over, but it wasn't. They rang the doorbell, no response. They refused to jump over the fence and open the door out of fear, so they called the cops. 2 officers arrived 5 minutes later. As they climbed over the fence, a hand reached out and started beating the window against its frame, destroying it. They waited a bit until no more glass was falling, then made their way to the door, the yelling even wilder. As they started knocking, everyone saw something being rammed through the tiny window, and the cops backed against the door frame to shield themselves. A roar, then a hit, a roar, then a hit, a roar, then a hit, and finally a massive flesh was jammed through the window, falling right there in front of everyone. The mangled corpse of the father. An elderly, overweight human body jammed through a tiny window. Needless to say, everyone scattered in fear, including the cops. The insane man still screaming his lungs out. By the time reinforcements arrived, the screams faded. Some teachers said the son fainted from fatigue and was taken away to parts unknown. Some said he split his head open on the door after ripping apart the foam that was on it and died on his way to the ER. All whom we asked agreed that the cops said the door was locked from the inside, and the keys were found in the garden, with only the dad's fingerprints on them. Most likely, knowing himself a goner, the man trapped himself and his son inside to make sure no one else died. Then the hazmat suits arrived. Then the movers too, and since the house was abandoned, outside of a company cleaning it weekly. I'm still frustrated to this day that I couldn't track down any infos on it due to how old the case was and the fact that I live in a third world country. It sounds made up, but so many adults told us it was real, and the only major contradiction between them is when the murder happened. TLDR. Abandoned haunted house next to my school. Teachers are more adults finally told us the story. Severely mentally ill man lived there, killed his overweight father, and jammed his body through a 30 to 50 centimeter circular window.
Well, I suppose if all the adults in the town learn the story when they were children, then become adults and tell the story to the next generation, that's how these urban legends can develop over time. If it actually happened, I would think there'd be court records or newspaper articles about it.
Dudley Road, in Billerica, Massachusetts. Nuns. Effing nun ghosts who hung themselves, or killed the children in their care, or were all killed by a drifter. No one agrees on the story. Anyway, nun ghosts. And if you make sure your car is dusty when you go, there will be handprints all over it when you leave, but you have to turn the car off and kill the lights for 1 minute. You can Google it. It makes us ever so proud. John Wayne Gacy owned a home in my town that was supposedly torn down before I was born. The street that I lived on when I was a kid had an empty cul-de-sac with a big field at the end. All the kids around the neighborhood would joke that that's where Gacy's house was. And one day, while I was doing laundry in my basement, I looked into the crawl space and saw a glowing blue face of a child peering out at me. I never went upstairs so fast in my life. The Irish Banshee is a woman who is a witch but appears to be pretty and lures in or catfishes younger men to kill them or cast a spell. Not that scary, to be honest, but her scream is scary. I don't know, just search up Irish Banshee screams. A young boy drowned in the wetlands in the 90s. People say between the hours of 2 and 3 a.m. you can see him running around in a white gown. I went hiking there with some high school buddies a while back during those hours, but we didn't see anything. The town I live in is at the start of the Devil's Footprints. The story goes that on the night of February 8, 1855, a heavy snow fell. In the morning, people woke to find a trail of marks in the snow, like cloven hoof prints, stretching between 40 and 100 miles across Devon. The mysterious thing is these hoof prints carried straight over obstacles and barriers, such as rivers and houses, with hoof prints found on top of snowy rooftops, and even seeming to enter and exit drain pipes no more than 4 inches across. Newspapers at the time proclaimed the devil himself had walked over Devon. We have an abandoned mental asylum here that was in operation in the 1800s. It's supposed to be haunted now, and the property is condemned, but plenty of people still sneak around there. We also have a few old houses that date to before the American Civil War that are supposedly haunted, as well as some ghosts in the local college campus, particularly in the geology building, where a boiler explosion killed a few people around the turn of the century.
Do you ever wonder what the fascination is with abandoned insane asylums? Why there are so many abandoned ones of them? I don't know. There's one by me, and I think the same thing.
Where I grew up, I know several people that saw this, but no one ever caught it or shot it. A large black cat, like a panther, roamed around the area. What is odd is there's never any signs of it. We're about 1,000 miles from any big cat territory, and the American Indians from the area had a story of an evil black cat in the area as well, and that legend is pre-European settlement. In the late 90s or early 2000s, a man who owned a moderately successful bee farm just came home to work one day and brutally murdered his entire family with an axe before killing himself. It is known locally as the Miller Bee Farm murders, and the site is only like 10 minutes from my house. The house was demolished, and now it's just an empty lot. The house did in fact once exist, but as for murders happening there, I have no idea. A few from Thailand. The construction of the Rama 2 highway, Route 35, was allegedly cursed by a statue, which made it always congested. There was an abandoned mall in Kanchanaburi that was built over a graveyard, which led to a lot of incidents and fires that eventually drove business away from that mall, leading to its closure. Rawhide and Bloody Bones. He's a skeletal razorback hog that wanders the forest. Supposedly, when he lived, he could talk because he ate a witch's alchemy scraps. She liked him a lot, and they'd spend time together on her porch. One day, hunters killed and butchered Rawhide and Bloody Bones. The witch found his bones and brought him back to life in his skeletal form, where he will gore hunters in the woods to this day. Sensabaugh Tunnel was built in the 1920s and was named for the man that owned the land, Edward Sensabaugh. In one version of this legend, Edward let a homeless man into his home as an act of charity. Their guest tried to steal jewelry, and Edward confronted him with a gun. The thief grabbed Edward's baby daughter to use as a shield and ran out of the house. He got away and drowned the baby in the tunnel. In the second version of the legend, Edward Sensabaugh went mad and killed his entire family and threw their bodies into the tunnel. Legend has it, if you switch off your car engine in the middle of the tunnel, it won't switch back on. Some say you can also hear the baby's cry and the approaching footsteps of Edward himself. Some have even claimed when driving through the tunnel, the shadow of a woman appears in your backseat.